Let's try this again. So did you know, though, that thrift stores have thrift stores too, right? So what they do is when they can't sell an item, or if it's just not of value to them to keep it anymore, right? They have places that they choose to get rid of things. And it looks kind of like this, right? This is where the retail thrift store is, right? TJ Maxx, Marshalls, Burlington. How many of y'all love those stores? I do. Okay, I'm confessing. All right. Y'all love the stores. Okay, but really, in all reality, is that what comes there is what was incapable of selling in a regular store. Right? It was stuff that nobody was willing to pay full price for. At least not in the amount of speed that it took for them to be happy. So the stores just like donate all their stuff, not donate, but for pennies on the dollar, they sell it to TJ Maxx, and TJ Maxx puts a sticker on it and sells it to you. And we all understand this concept of TJ Maxx. I saw this quote online this week, and I thought it was brilliant. It was from some random internet stranger. It says, you don't go to TJ Maxx looking for something. You go there for the store to tell you what you need, right? And that's kind of what it is, right? You don't ever know when you go inside of a TJ Maxx what you're going to come out with, right? It's always going to see what they have, right? And you may have a need, right? But you don't know how they might be able to even fulfill that need, right? There's no staple items that you can always count on being there. It's always new and fresh, and that's really fun. But you want me to tell you a secret about TJ Maxx? TJ Maxx really only needs you to buy one thing, okay? It's all they need you to buy is one thing, and I'm going to tell you why in just a minute. I can tell you why because this morning, it was funny, me and Mandy she was getting ready, and she had a new pair of socks, and she had got them at Burlington, I think, and she said, this is the only thing I bought, and I spent 15 minutes. I wanted these socks so bad. If you want to see the socks, Mandy's got the socks on today because I took the tags off for her, right? And so I said, that is so perfect because I'm going to talk about that very thing this morning. All Burlington and TJ Maxx really wants you to do is shop their whole store and buy one thing. Why? Because then you're going to come up to the front and there's going to be a line that looks like this, right? And it's going to take you 25 minutes to buy that one thing. And in the process of it taking you that 25 minutes, you're going to have to walk by and decide whether or not you're going to purchase every single little thing on those little aisles. There's one person running a register, right? And you think that's by accident. Some people do it to save money, but TJ Maxx does it to make money because they know that if they can keep you in that line long enough, you're going to need that cell phone case because you got a little chip in yours, right? All they're wanting you to do is, and it's this concept of buying on impulse, right? It's the reason that the chewing gum is at the aisle right at the very end. Nobody at any point in time in the history of man, I don't think, went into a store and said, I'm here to buy chewing gum, right? It's just not how it works. We tend to go buy all the things we actually need, and then they put those impulse purchases at the end, right? The things that you're going to buy, not really thinking about the fact that if you buy 5 of them, it's going to end up costing a lot more. It's all the things that they don't think they can put in the regular part of the store, but if they can just make you sit there and look at it while you're waiting on somebody else, then they can sell it to you. TJ Maxx just thrives on this principle of impulse purchases. I would argue, due to my scientific research, that 99% of all purchases made at TJ Maxx are impulse purchases, okay? And my extensive research in the sense that I've never bought anything there that I plan to buy, right? And so we understand the concept of acting on impulse. Now, how many times have you bought something at TJ Maxx or Marshalls and it was a great deal? It had that pretty red sticker on it, the clearance sticker, because you think, I'm in a clearance place and I'm getting a clearance off the clearance, right? And 3 years later, you're cleaning out your closet and it's still sitting there. It's still got the little red tag on it, and you're taking it to the other thrift store so they can sell it now, right? Any of you guilty? Nobody? Am I the only guilty one? So either y'all lying, we need to sing an invitation song right now, right? You You know that. You know that feeling, right? We buy things on impulse that we don't really need, but sometimes we think, oh, it's such a good deal. If I could buy 3. This is a third of the price, of what I would normally have to pay for something. And sometimes you get something and it's of value to you. But sometimes you get something and it goes in a closet or it goes in a drawer and you never touch it again. And you could have saved your $3 and $4, whatever it had been. And if you add up all of the impulse purchases that you've ever made in your life that you never actually used, and all that money came back into your pockets, we're going to have a good contribution today if that would have happened, right? We all waste money on things that we don't end up using. When we think about the Judges and think about how this relates over into the Judges, we're going to go ahead and go to the next slide because I don't have it on mine here. We're going to go ahead and go into Judges 11. We're talking about this concept of impulse purchases. And what I think we see today is a bunch of impulsive decisions. Sometimes you have to make decisions quickly. Right? Sometimes there's just an inevitability that you have to make a decision based on a certain time frame. And in that time frame, you have to act. You have to make a decision. Most of those decisions that you have to make impulsively are not life or death decisions. And they're not decisions that you have to make like right now. Right? Most of the time, impulse decisions that we can make are, like where are we going to lunch today, right? Some of you are already thinking about that, so I just figured I'd incorporate it into the sermon. All right, so, where are we going to go to lunch today? What are we going to do, right? But you really think about impulse purchases. If I ask you, I want you to make major life decisions on impulse, you recognize immediately that sounds dangerous, right? You don't want to rush major life decisions. You don't change careers on an impulse. Maybe you do, but sometimes what happens is you do and then you regret it, right? You don't really think through it. We recognize that there are decisions that don't need to be impulse decisions. Israel had a real knack that once they're down in the dark dumps of their cycle that we've been talking about, they act impulsively. Whatever gets me out of this situation the quickest, no matter the cost, right? I need to get here. I don't really care what I have to do to get there, so I'm going to do whatever the cost. Well, this judge that we're going to talk about today is filled with impulse decisions, both of Israel and the leader himself. It's really a whole 2 chapters, Judges 11 and 12. We won't hit all of it, but Judges 11 and 12 is all about impulses. It's all about people who are acting without really thinking about the consequences for what they're doing before they do it. All right, so let's read together. Jephthah is his name. So Jephthah the Gileadite was a mighty warrior. All right, notice that's important, that he was a mighty warrior. If you have been with us thus far in this series, you know that Israel has not been just running over with mighty warriors. As a matter of fact, they've spent a lot of time during this period downtrodden and beaten and not having mighty warriors, right? His father was Gilead, right? Thus the name, Gileadite. His mother, on the other hand, was a prostitute. She did not come directly through the family lineage. And so Gilead's wife bore him sons, and they grow up, and when they grow up, they drive Jephthah away. What do they say? Hey, you're not going to get any of the inheritance of our family. I can't share any major details of a story, but I know some stories of some families who were really, really good families until the really, really rich grandfather died. And then everybody started fighting over who gets the money. So they see the train coming down the tracks. They say, Gilead, Jephthah, you're not a real Gileadite, right? You're just kind of, sort of, right? So they drive him out because you're the son of another woman. You're kind of one of us, but you're not totally one of us. You can already see that this is already starting an impulse track. We've already got impulse decision 1. They're kicking him out of the family. Who are they kicking out of the family? The mighty warrior. Why are they kicking the mighty warrior out of the family? Think about that for just a second. Who's going to be, in the end fight of the inheritance, who's going to be the most likely to win the inheritance war? The mighty warrior, right? And so they say, we just need to go ahead and get rid of that problem now. And so they kick him out. So we already have in the first couple of verses impulse number one, and it's his family kicking him out of the family without really thinking about what the ramifications for that might look like. What will be the end result of that? Those questions don't go through the head. Instead, it's just, he's going to get some of this money, and I want more money. Not less money, so let's kick him out. All right, let's continue. Verse 3. So Jephthah fled from his brothers. All right, he ran away because he was certainly outnumbered. He goes and he settles in this land of Tob, which sounds like it's out of a Harry Potter movie for whatever reason, right? Where a gang of scoundrels, Harry Potter again, okay, here we go, gathered around him and followed him. So it's just natural that Jephthah, in a world, in a land in which you cannot live alone, right? You can't really live alone in our world, but you can do it maybe a little bit more effectively than in this land, in this world, right? Because you don't, like you can go to Walmart or order Walmart delivered to your door even if you don't have any friends, right? In this world and in this age and this land, you couldn't do everything by yourself. Right? It just did not work that way. You had to be surrounded by people. So Jephthah flees, and where does he go and he finds? He goes and finds a gang of scoundrels to gather around him. I don't know some of you, I don't know your friend group. Some of you, I know some of your friends and some of your acquaintances and things, but a lot of you, I don't know what your friend groups are. But if somebody came up to me and said, hey, that Diane lady, she's left, she's going off, when she goes back to Hueytown after church, she's got a gang of scoundrels that follow her everywhere around, right? I hope you don't, Diane, but all right, but you understand that we would immediately have certain things in our head, and we would say, you're not choosing your friends wisely. I have a need. I need a place to settle. My family has kicked me out. Ooh, here's a convenient gang of scoundrels. Let's join them. Impulse decision number 2. Notice what has not happened in these first few verses, and you're going to see it as a theme throughout this judge story. Nobody's asked God, hey, what should I do? God, I just got kicked out from my family. Or the family should have said, God, we got this guy here who we're not really sure is one of us. Should we kick him out of the family? And then he gets kicked out. And he didn't go, God, I've been kicked out and removed from my family. I just need you to provide me a place that I can be around people who will build me up, make me a better person, right? No, he goes and he finds the closest thing who he thinks can protect him. And because, notice back to verse 1, he's a mighty warrior. What happens when a mighty warrior comes into a gang of scoundrel? We have the mafia boss, right? Jephthah is a mafia boss, all right? Modern day mafia boss. He's the head scoundrel for whatever. There's Disney movies that run all through your head here, right? Where you get the one smart guy who's got all the people working under him. You know the story, right? So we have head of the gang of scoundrels in Jephthah here. So we've already got impulse decision 1, we've got impulse decision 2, but we are nowhere near done. All right, sometime later, the Ammonites were fighting against Israel. Right? Israel finds themselves in this place a lot. They're oppressed during this era of the judges. They forget God. They fall away. These cycles continue to happen. At the beginning of the book, we started seeing fairly long cycles. The cycles get shorter and shorter and shorter. The judges get shorter and shorter. They keep falling away quicker and quicker and quicker. Okay, so the Ammonites were fighting against Israel. The elders of Gilead went to get Jephthah. Hey, Jephthah, come, be our commander so we can fight our Ammonites. You know that whole thing, Jephthah, where we kicked you out of the family because of who your mama was? Let's just kind of forget about that because we're getting beat up over here and we need some mighty warriors. We're all out of mighty warriors. Come be our mighty warrior, Jephthah. And what does Jephthah say? Not all the verses are there, but he says exactly what you or I would say. Why am I good enough for you now when I wasn't good enough for you a few months ago, right? What does this look like? Why are you doing this? Notice again what they didn't do. They didn't consult God in this thing. They didn't say, God, should we go get Jephthah to be our commander? No, they see a problem. They see a mighty warrior who they grew up with and knew. And so they swallow their pride a little bit and they go out and impulsively try to get Jephthah back into the mold and into the scene. So Jephthah eventually does agree, and here's what he says. Here's that line. Didn't you hate me and drive me from my father's house? Why do you come to me now when you're in trouble? The elders of Gilead said to him, nevertheless, right? Which I think is really funny, right? Hey, why do you come to me now when you're in trouble? And they just say, well, nevertheless, I mean, this is just modern. Let's just not worry about that, okay? We're turning to you now, okay? Let's forget the past and let's move forward. And that sounds really good on paper sometimes, to forget the past and move forward. But sometimes in order to move forward, you got to deal with the past. And they never make us stop to deal with the past. You know, it's not we were wrong and we want to move forward together. No, it was just, let's just forget about that. We're turning to you now. Come fight with us against the Ammonites, and you'll be head over all of us who live in Gilead. All right, so let's think about this just from their perspective. I don't know that we have a modern day equivalent. I was doing some thinking this week of what is the equivalent part of this. But the closest I get was that whole mafia thing, right? Like the mafia leader, this is kind of like the mafia leader got kicked out. The mafia got in trouble. And so they asked the mafia leader to come back because they're in trouble. Can you imagine that there might be some friction in this relationship even after they come back together? You know, maybe, just maybe, when this guy who's a mighty warrior and has a gang of scoundrels gets a little bit of power back, it may not turn out too well for us, right? But they don't really think through that. And they don't think through it at all. And so they go and they find him, and then they make this promise to him. If you'll come back, you can be our leader. We will follow after you. Now, we don't know a whole lot about Jephthah's upbringing, really, at all. The only really thing we have been privy to in this conversation so far is that, one, he was a mighty warrior, and two, that when he got kicked out of the family, he went and found a gang of scoundrels to be the head of. So far, Jephthah's batting about a 0 on the good meter of what we know about him. Right? He's just not, and you're going to see this, Jephthah and Samson, that we'll go into next week, not a good guy, right? If you grew up thinking Samson was great because of Vacation Bible School, he is like the ultimately bad judge, right? That's the whole point of Samson. He's terrible, right? Jephthah is like the second to last bad judge. He's like almost the worst judge, right? So we see this, and so this whole circumstance, it's just a calamity leading to badness, right? There's nothing good that's going to come out of this, and we kind of all know it, but Jephthah does become their leader. And after that, I'm going to fast forward real fast, but if you get a chance to go read it this afternoon, read it. But Jephthah does come over. They go off and they do some conquering. The Bible says the Spirit of the Lord came on him, and they do some good stuff in being able to kind of redeem the people for the time, right? And go down, here's the Spirit of the Lord comes on Jephthah. He crossed Gilead, Manasseh, he passed through Mizpah of Gilead. From there he advanced against the Ammonites. Jephthah made a vow to the Lord, right? So things are good here. We've already had several advances before this, okay? We've got the people, they're starting to move. Things are starting to happen. Things are looking good. Jephthah, you're our leader. You've rescued us. Thank you. And Jephthah's all fired up. But he's got to go out and fight these Ammonites now. And he says to God, if you give the Ammonites into my hands, whoever comes out the door of my house to meet me when I return in triumph from the Ammonites will be the Lord's, and I will sacrifice it as a burnt offering. Of all the impulsive things that you could possibly say when you're trying to make a deal with God, this may be a number one example of things you should not say when you are making promises to God. Now, we've all made promises to God, right? God, if you deliver me from this moment, I promise I'm going to do this. And I would just venture to say that most likely we have all broken promises to God. I'm not judging everybody. I don't know your situation. I know I have. But the idea that in order to get God on his side, he's going to give a sacrifice of whatever happens to come out of the front door when he comes back from war seems like a mighty odd thing to ask. And so you might ask, why would he say that? Would he think that a human would be the next thing out, or was he thinking that a cow was going to come out? What is the thing that he's thinking towards? And you might think that he's thinking towards animals, and it may be that that crossed his mind at some point, but you need to remember, and if you study through this region and what's happening, human sacrifice was very common, not among God's people. God never called on that. The only thing we see of that is one time, really, right? And what did God do? God stopped it from happening, didn't he? Human sacrifice is really it's not a God people thing. It's an other people thing. So I think that he may have even known here that there's the possibility that I'm going to be doing a human sacrifice. God didn't ask for that human sacrifice, right? God didn't say that. If Jephthah would have said, God, just humble me, I want to go fight, and I want to give you all the praise and all the honor and all the glory, that would have, I think, been plenty enough good for God. But God decides, no. And Jephthah says, no, I'm going to make this really stupid promise to God. And as you can probably imagine, the worst thing possible that could happen happens. Jephthah returns home. Who should come out to meet him? But his daughter. Dancing to the sound of timbrels, we have been saved. Salvation has come to our people. The daughter comes out and she's celebrating. She's in a spot of praise. She was an only child. He had no other son, no other daughter, his only child. And when he saw her, he tore his clothes and cried. Oh no, my daughter, you have brought me down and I am devastated. What did the daughter do? The daughter came out because her dad came home. I've made a vow to the Lord that I cannot break. Now, this is one of those really important times when you're reading through the Judges. It's really important because if you deal with people who doubt the validity of the Bible, the Judges is a place that they will come and they'll camp out sometimes. There's other places as well. And they'll talk about the fact that how would a loving God allow this stuff to happen? And those are difficult questions sometimes for us as Christians to answer, right? Because we don't understand all the inner workings and the things behind it, and some of it is a mystery beyond us. But in this particular instance, we need to be reminded that the Bible sometimes doesn't sugarcoat what did happen to tell us what should have happened, right? I believe in the concept of the inspiration of Scriptures. I believe what we have is what God wanted us to have, okay? But at the same time, everything that happens in Scripture was not God ordained. Okay? God did not ask him to make this vow. And ironically, you know who's totally absent in this whole process? God, in every instance. We don't have any instance. She actually asked, she said, since I'm not going to be able to live, basically, can I go off and like live on my own for a month or two? He allows her to. She comes back and he sacrifices her. He never asked God, is this a good thing to ask? And even after the fact that agreement has been made with God, guess what he never does that we know of, at least we have no record of? Hey, God, are you sure you want me to do this? I need you to tell me if this is what you really want. There's no consultation of God. It's impulse decision after impulse decision after impulse decision. There's no seeking counsel from God in this process anywhere. The story goes on, and you go into the next chapter, chapter 12, and we find Jephthah, and he calls together the men of Gilead, and they go fight against Ephraim again. The Gileadites struck them down because the Ephraimites had said, you Gileadites are renegades from Ephraim and Manasseh. Right? The Gileadites captured the fords of the Jordan leading to Ephraim. And whenever a survivor of Ephraim said, let me cross over, they asked him a question. So they set up this little makeshift execution chamber. Again, if you read through, you will see that God did not ask for or ordain, or none of that was in this thing. Did God at times say, you need to go conquer a land and you need to get rid of everything in that land? He does. We don't hide from that. It's the reality of what Scriptures are, right? God was, in many ways, I believe there's perfectly good explanations because he recognized the influence of other gods were going to have on his people. And they do, over and over. But in this particular instance, we say no consultation of God. They're mad and they're angry at a people. If you go read the first few verses here, you'll see that. And so they set up this makeshift like ford in the river, and they say, are you an Ephraimite? If he replied no, here's what they do. They said, all right, say Shibboleth. All right, everybody say Shibboleth. Shibboleth. Have we lost? All right, Shibboleth. Okay, you may have gotten by. I don't know. But if he said Sibboleth instead of Shibboleth, because he couldn't pronounce the word correctly, in other words, they're using someone's dialect, right? This would have been ironically like me using those Spanish slides this morning, right? They seized him and killed him at the fords of the Jordan. And notice what happens. 42,000 Ephraimites were killed at that time. Again, no consultation of God. No, God, do you want us to do this? No, it's over and over again. I'm going to kill you. In this particular instance, it's because of your dialect does not match up. And they kill 42,000 people. No command from God to do that. No moment where God has a heart-to-heart with Jephthah. And no indication, by the way, that Jephthah ever intended to have many heart-to-hearts with God. He's just a pretty bad dude. But Jephthah led Israel 6 years. Interestingly, and we're going to talk a little about this next week just to get a little ahead, but people like Jephthah and people like Samson end up in Hebrews 11 where it talks about what we call the Hall of Faith sometimes. We're going to talk a little bit about that next week because it's kind of hard to understand and wrap our minds around. Okay, we'll talk about that a little next week. But notice what we see here that's a little different than a lot of these other leaders. 6 years, right? What's significant about that? We've seen 40 years, we've seen 70 years, I think we've seen 20 years. I mean, like, there's all kinds of different time frames here, but Jephthah only gets 6 years. So this cycle that we've been looking at, this cycle where the people are in sin, they go to oppression, they repent, and they hunt a way out, and then God delivers them. This cycle, what happens on the cycle is very much like a snowball that creates an avalanche. What happens when the snowball starts at the top of the hill? It's very slow. It catches up speed. But what happens, as time goes on, you get out of control, and that's exactly what's happened with the Israelite people. As a matter of fact, if you go finish the rest of this chapter, and I encourage you to do it, you're going to see people who just for very short periods of time, and we don't know a whole lot about them, right? Because the snowball is rolling, the avalanche is going, and sin is making its presence known much more than deliverance, and significantly more of what that last thing that we talked about, how to break the cycle, going off into worship, living lives of worship, living lives that focus on kingdom living and kingdom thinking. They never branch off from that. And so this cycle continues to happen at a faster and faster and faster pace. And so here's what I just want to leave you with is this. Impulse decisions are contrary to the Spirit. Notice when in Galatians we're given these fruits of the Spirit. It's really fruit of the Spirit, but fruit, whichever way you want to look at it. But it's describing what the fruit, the manifestation, the result of the Spirit living in you. If the Spirit's living in you, it's going to produce some things. It's going to produce peace, forbearance, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Now, I point out these because as best I can understand the meaning of these and what they are, I think they're the most that are contrary to the concept of making impulse decisions. So how does this play out into your life? How does this play out into our congregational life? How does it play out into all of that? And it's just simply this. When you go in your life and you have the moment in your life where you've got big decisions you make, decisions that are going to shape your future forever, shift everything about your life, and even in the smaller decisions, it's a good decision to do this, right? And in congregational life, big decisions, little decisions, it's a good idea to do this. But let me just encourage you to do one thing, church. It's the only thing I want you to take on your Thanksgiving week this week. Take one home with you. When you make decisions, bring Jesus and bring God and bring the Spirit along for the decision-making process. Okay? Allow Him to have a say in your life. Allow Him to have a voice in guiding you towards faithful decisions that lead to peace. A whole lot of people die in this story. Nobody really seems concerned with peace. There's not a whole lot of gentleness in this story. And there's almost a total absence of self-control in this story. And I think 99.99% of everything that happens in this story could have been prevented if all of the people involved would have been making decisions that involve God into the decision process, right? So you go out this week and you go and you do all the little things and all the big things you do this week. Bring God along for the ride. Bring God to your red light when you pray, right? Pray at your red lights, you know. Bring God when that person cuts you off in traffic, right? Bring God when that person in retail on Black Friday, when you're out there at 4 a.m. in the morning, whoever you crazy people are that do that, but when you're out there doing it, recognize somebody got up at 4 a.m. to try to work and make a living, and they might be overwhelmed, and you can treat them with kindness no matter how they treat you. You can control that. You can't control the day they had. You can't control what they went through, but you can control what you do to their life. So in all those little decisions, bring God along, and then you're going to have some big decisions in your life as life goes on. If you're younger, you may have more big decisions ahead of you, right? Those of you who are a little older in age, you may not have as many of the big decisions of life left. Some of you know where you're going to live most of the rest of your life at least. Some of you know you have a lot more that is settled, right? So maybe those big decisions are already made for you. But here's one thing that if you're of that age, you can do, and you do know. You made decisions in your life, sometimes even big decisions, and you didn't really stop to bring God along for the ride. And you've got some wisdom because you've got some bumps in the road, and you've got some scars, and you can have influence and voice if you'll choose to invest in the lives of those who are still waiting to make those decisions. So use your wisdom as a force for good to say, hey, I made these mistakes, and this is what led to them. And at the end of the day, I wouldn't have made that mistake if, and I would just say the one reason you wouldn't have made that mistake, if I would have stopped and consulted God and slowed down and waited on His timing and His answers, then I wouldn't have ended up in this situation. And I want better for you than what I had, right? So that's the challenge of the week, okay? But not just the challenge of the week. It's the challenge for your life. It's the challenge that the judges show is when they choose impulsively. And not only did they choose impulsively, they impulsively chose an impulsive person. This is a whole lot of friction, and it's surely to end in dynamite exploding, right? You put a whole bunch of explosive stuff into a tight little room, and bad things are going to happen. And that's exactly what happens here, and it's true for your life. And so here's what I encourage you to be. And you heard me talk about this when we talked about elders, and I told you we were going to kind of link some of this back in because this is a leadership series. Be the person when you walk into a room, you bring the tone of the room down. You bring a sense of peace and calm into the room, and not someone who escalates the conflict, right? You may, as a Christian, sometimes you've heard you run away when there's a fight. I don't believe that's always the course of action for a Christian. Sometimes you've got to run into the fight and be the peacemaker in the middle of it. But don't be the one who's running into the middle of it, right, in order to escalate it. So we choose to use God's gifts that He's given us, that fruit of the Spirit, to be forces of peace, to be forces of gentleness, to be forces of self-control, even in the middle of chaos. And if you'll do that in your life, if you'll walk in step with that Spirit, if you'll seek for God to instill in those things, you'll bring Him along the life. You won't live the easiest life that you could live possibly, but you'll live the best life. Because you'll have Jesus as King, God as Creator, and the Spirit living and working and breathing in you to create in you a new person. And that is what we are called to be new creation, to be who God wants us to be. We ultimately are all seeking, and we're going to mess it up, church. We're going to mess it up sometimes. We're going to go our own way. We're going to do impulsive things. We're not going to consult God. We're going to mess it up sometimes. But here's where the process of this is understanding that cycle of the Israelites, and don't let that be your cycle, right? You're going to fall into sin sometimes. Sin's going to threaten you, but spend your life in worship. Let sin be the exception and worship be what we seek in our lives. And I think if you do that, you're going to live a good life, a life that will be pleasing to God. And here's the cool part of it, church. This is the coolest part. You live that kind of life, you're going to get to live that kind of life forever. Into eternity and eternity. That is kingdom living. If you've never become a part of the kingdom, we'd love for you to make that decision to be part of the kingdom today, to put on Jesus, to put on the life of Jesus, not because it's the easiest way, but because it's the best way, and because it ultimately leads to hope that's beyond this life and the brokenness of this world. Because, church, if you've been reading this story and you've been reading through Judges, I promise you read through Judges, you're going to sit there and say, man, this feels like it's being written today. There's times where it's just going to feel like it's being written today. You need Jesus in your life. If you've never made him king over your life, we'd love for you to be marked with him, to put on his name, to wash away the old man, to come up new. Or maybe you're struggling, church, to make the right decisions, and you need people around you, and you need God on your side in these decision-making processes, and you need God to invest in you, and you haven't done a very good job of it on your own, and you need some support around you. God may use your neighbor. He may use the person sitting right next to you in the pew or down the aisle from the pew for you to guide you and strengthen you, and we want to be that family to each other. Whatever spiritual need you have, come while we'll sing together.